All right. So today we're going to look at social conditioning and the Garden of Eden. And when we think about the Garden of Eden, so we don't think about the Garden of Eden in terms of it being a biblical story. So we have to think in terms of it being a political story. So, and when we do that, we look at some of the symbols that are found in the Garden of Eden. And by doing that, the first key symbol is the fact that the Garden of Eden is found in its location, which is to the east. So four, you have four essential elements of or sub symbols that can be depicted through the east. So you have air, communication, the idea of new beginnings, and the idea of new growth. So air, of course, is one of like the many gifts that has been bestowed on us from man. I mean, from God and Mother Nature. So air can be equated to a form of natural control, although it would be a form of positive control because air is needed to breathe and it works as insulation for the earth. It regulates the coldness and hotness and keeps the earth from getting too extreme on either level. Early in the semester, we contended that part of racism devolves from this inherent envy and like this hatred for all things natural, right? So if air then is natural and is a natural element that is found in Eden, then the role of colonialism would be to find some type of way to control air. So, being universal, air is an element that the powers that be they can't fully control, but they can simulate control. And what do I mean by simulate? One, you have this engorging system of capitalism where it allows corner stores, for example, to charge fees, sometimes $2, 250. And this just simply to put air in a tire, and that exhibits like a lower form of control. Second idea, the building of chemical plants and like the releasing of hazardous pollutants in specified areas. So, like in Houston, you have Fifth Ward and was it Cashmere Gardens and I think Trinity Garden um, that has been affected by chemical plants. So, what happens? The quality of air and for that matter the health of persons breathing the air are then corporately directed, which represents like a higher medium form of control. And then the third example, because air symbolizes life, so think about air and life as one. So then the goal is to legally control lives, so you control life through healthcare, through housing, um, affordability, and prison. So metaphorically, they are able to monitor air, and it represents a higher form of control. Other, I guess, metaphorical instances of controlling life or air would be you have birth certificate requirements when you're born, death certificate requirements when you die, marriage certificate requirements when you unionize, driver's license requirements to legally operate a motor vehicle. Yeah. So then we move to the next one. So you have the control of communication, and that's the next step, trying to decode the symbolism of the East in the Garden of Eden. Mark Twain stated something to the effect that there are laws that are put in place to protect the freedom of the press's speech, but there are no laws that are worth anything to protect the people from the press. Media propaganda. So control of the media is connected to control of the mind. Historically, religion and the Bible have been especially when we're talking about a system of bondage. It has been one of the primary media related tools used to control society's method of thinking and subservient behavior. So, in media propaganda, What happens? Times of war. First casualty is the truth. Manufacture of consent is also, of course, tied into communication and media propaganda. Manufacture of consent is a euphemism for social control. So, manufacture of consent states that in a democracy, it is wrong to control people by force, but those people will not know it is wrong if you, the government, control what they think. The prohibiting of the apple, which transformed Adam and Eve into godlike figures, is manufacture of consent, an attempt to maintain underclass human ignorance and legal servility. Now, so if we replace God in the story with government, then the story takes on a new meaning, which is perfect. So, and of course, my book, The Slave Psychology, this is the type of stuff that it talks about. So, and that idea, that's how you have the Bible going from a biblical text to a political text, which also moves the story to each next sub symbol, and that's the idea of a new beginning. And then, of course, you also have new growth. So, new beginning being something that is recently built, created, invented, is decoded as what's new: the spread of colonialism, the spread of capitalism. Philosophical ideals of new growth became Western expansion. And it wasn't about nature's growth, but unnatural growth. So, as colonialism, neo-colonialism, and capitalism are, in a sense, anti-nature, because what happens? They destroy as much of nature as possible and replace it with artificial intelligence technology. Christian teachings tell us, and when we talk about social control, Christian teachings, it tells its congregation that heaven is in the afterlife rather than on earth. So what happens? Poor people search for heaven in the afterlife, while preachers, bishops, popes, and rich people search for heaven on earth. Poor people search for riches in the afterlife, while preachers, popes, bishops, rich people make their riches in this life off the sweat of poor people. Um, so this also means that some people, and when we talk about the technology, some people will argue that a current technological millionaire may not make his millions from poor people, but they leave out the past exploitation that makes current technological capitalism possible. Next, the tree in the Garden of Eden, it depicts at least two forms of control. So first, it shows this ongoing battle between food and nature, or regular citizens. So, for instance, the control and manipulation of food by corporations and big farms. Examples: Black farmers face racial discrimination and received an unequal share of subsidies to maintain and grow individual Black farms during Jim Crow, during the in 1980s and 1990s, and probably before that. Um, but cities across the town, small cities. So even like the place I'm from, Conroe, Texas, they sent what they referred to as mosquito trucks around. And I don't think it was just Black neighborhoods, but just probably any neighborhood that had natural growth. But they sent it to these neighborhoods to spray chemicals that eventually killed off a lot of natural growing food items, such as the pecan tree, the pear trees, the honeysuckles, the plum trees, the red and black berries. All of these things that kept you healthy, and now you have to buy from the store at a quality that's reduced. MOs. When we talk about social conditioning, MOs play a role in everything a person does or thinks. So the government conditions control of the individual through MOs. One example is being the quality of nutrition. So if an individual has an experience poor, painful health effects resulting directly from their diet, then they won't be motivated to purchase organic foods whose campaign is to promote better health. Once an individual gets sick due to poor diet, then from the doctors, the advice is to eat healthier, more expensive foods, um, foods that most people can't afford. A condition MO contrived by rewards and bribes. The second part of that is the tree. It shows the battle of the knowing and unknowing. So this example can be clarified using the law as the model. And we probably talked about this when we talked about plea bargaining. So if you take a 17-year-old teenager and he is pulled over for evading arrest, all right. So once the officer gets behind the teenager, all right, and this is the example. So we'll say the teenager, let's say he immediately slows down. He puts his hazard lights on, indicating his acknowledgement of the officer's authority as well as the teenager's subsequent compliance. But he fails to stop immediately because, let's say, he is in front of a house where a child's party is in progress. Instead, he pulls further down the road. The officer, seeing this action as a challenge to his authority, charges him with evading arrest in a motor vehicle, which is a state jail felony, and you can get up to 2 years, including up to a $10,000 fine, and that's for Texas. So in court, he's assigned a court-appointed attorney because he can't afford to hire one for one for that case would probably be about $3,000. Um, his court-appointed attorney, who's working more on behalf of the court, the judge and the prosecutor, then his client, he does everything in his power to get the teenager to plead guilty instead of everything in his power to get the case dismissed, as a video would clearly show that he wasn't evading. So being young, ignorant of the law, also afraid to go to trial, teenager, he accepts this plea. Right. So he accepts the offer that his lawyer argues is a good one. So you have no jail time, a $3,000 fine to be paid in quote unquote affordable monthly installments, no probation. And he tells him the felony will be dropped to a misdemeanor if he pleads out now. So then, of course, that sounds like a satisfactory deal. So teenager, he takes the offer. However, the lawyer fails to tell him that that only the sentencing will be of a misdemeanor crime, but the felony charge will remain on his background, which brands him a felon for life. All right. So, this example, it just shows the unknowledgeable and the underprivileged man in a feeble position against those who control resources and knowledge, i.e., the forbidden nature of eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Willie Lynch, I bring the Willie Lynch letter up often. The Willie Lynch letter, it postulates how it is easier for an outside group to take over a foreign land if the colonizers know the language. If they do not know the language of the foreign land, then it becomes extremely difficult to navigate the country. Thus, it is better to keep the common folk ignorant of classified fields of study such as law. And to that effect, the average law degree in America costs about just under $43,000, and that's annually. And then graduate programs in other fields are estimated to be annually just under $20,000. It's important that the tree of life is in the center of the garden. So here, God, which we're saying is the government, forbids Adam and Eve from eating of the tree where they would learn about good and bad, right? But what's my motto? God ain't never wrote no book, right? So who gave this edict in the guise of the supreme? During the early 1900s, America passed several prohibition laws. The 18th Amendment was ratified in 1919 to prohibit the manufacture, sale, transportation of intoxicating liquors in United States territory. Numbers running was also outlawed during this era. The government, they punished mafias who conspired to take over businesses and raise prices on products. So it's three examples. But what happened? Once the government was able to control the taxes and the business, liquor became legal. Numbers running morphed into state lotteries. And then essentially every company, what happens? They increase their prices, some as much as twice a year over time. And then, but the wages still remain unequally low. One of the last ideas, important ideas in garden, because you got the snake and the serpent. The implantation of a snake in the garden to manipulate Eve, it poses an interesting question. Um, Through a patriarchal lens, women are easier to manipulate or quicker to serve as a buffer between common man and oppressor, right? So that's through the lens of the patriarch. Um, we talked about white supremacy being hierarchical, and hierarchically patriarchal in nature. And the patriarchy is supported by white women supremacists because it works for the maintenance of the system. All right, so Willie Lynch letter focuses on women, but of course it focuses on the African American female, stating that the control of the African American woman is easier than the control of the African American man. All right, so they say you must keep your eye and thoughts on the female and the offspring. Pay little attention to the generation of original breaking, but concentrate on future generation. Therefore, if you break the female mother, she will break the offspring in its early years of development. Um, War on Poverty uses this idea. African American women, if they are manipulated into believing that the white man or the government is benevolent, then they will persuade the African American man not to uprise against enslavement of any kind, right? And of course, this is the Willie Lynch letter because they focus on the African American woman, but you can also take that same idea and flip flop it, especially now because now I think you can influence the African American man the same way, maybe even easier, and then everything will reverse and work the opposite way. Anyway, the focus on not knowing something is at the center of any group, entity, or individual seeking control over another. So I pose two important questions here for the garden. One, why does God want Adam and Eve to be ignorant? And two, who would benefit most from a bunch of ignorant men and women? If I wanted to run a business based on wage workers, it would be easier to spread the idea of my benevolence to a group of men and women who couldn't read or think critically or understand the concept of exploitation or understand the concept of racism, classism, capitalism, white supremacy as the same movement. Right? So this person would think a wage of $15 to $16 an hour compared to the current federal minimum wage of $7.25 is a generous deal despite current prices of living. And therefore they would be stuck in a cyclical poverty while making me richer and reinforcing my social control over my employees.